Then you guys won't get angry with me for keeping you from lunch. So, brilliant. Thank you for coming back so promptly. Well, we're only a couple of minutes late, but that's fine. Okay. May I ask, as we do our organizations, for people to come onto the stage. I am delighted. I'm delighted and super excited to introduce you to the second session of the day. I like that. Word, yeah. Indeed, greenwashing. Anyway, I'm excited to bring you session 2. What sustainability, easy for me to say, information do stakeholders need? Now, we were talking, I think that was a point that came through again and again from the first session in terms of, and the advice to Mr. Koopman in terms of what he should do. And engaging with and focusing on what your stakeholders need should be at the center of what we do. Okay, in terms of building trust and transparency. So I'm honored to welcome onto the stage Mr. Robert Scharfe, CEO for Luxembourg Stock Exchange since 2012. In addition, Mr. Robert has many roles. He's a member of the Board of Directors of the Federation of European Securities and Exchanges, and he's chairman of the board of FundSquare, a wholly owned subsidiary of the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. And before this, Robert spent an extensive career. I've been watching how many roles you've had. Ended up heading up corporate and investment banking. In addition, I'll invite all of the speakers up to the stage now, and then Robert will start the session by contextualizing. So if Heidi Hotala, if you would like to come up as well. I'll introduce Heidi more formally when Heidi comes up to do her presentation. In addition, we have Mr. Arnaldas Abramovitsits. Did I say that right? I've probably still got it wrong. My apologies. Do come up. He's from the first vice president from the Commission of European Commission of the Committee of the Regions. And lastly, but no means least, we have Mr. Lazarus Lazarou, a member of the European Court of Auditors since November 2010. Also, I don't know whether you would like to now, shall we introduce our young ones now or a bit later? Would you like to come up now? So Ville and Sarah, come up, share the stage. And now I will share, after doing all of the quick intros, I will ask Robert to start this session. Over to you, Robert.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me this morning. Just a word of introduction where I'm coming from. In fact, I'm heading the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, an exchange, as we tend to say, unlike any other, because we are specialized not only in transacting, but above all in listing international securities coming from all over the world. And just to give you two numbers, we are currently listing 36,000 different financial instruments coming from issuers originating from more than 100 countries. This is important to understand, in fact, what I continue to elaborate upon, because it's about data, about information, and above all, about meaningful data. Now, closing by what we have done at the exchange, and probably, in fact, why I'm here, in fact, today is when we're looking at the Paris Agreement, or rather, in fact, the conference coming up, and where, in fact, we felt in 2015 that this time might be different. Something is changing. And to cut a long story short, in fact, we came to the conclusion that we, first of all, could and should contribute to making the Paris Agreement happen, and also to contribute of making sustainable finance mainstream. Now, that's why we created, and that was our conclusion, the world's first green exchange, the Luxembourg Green Exchange, a platform entirely dedicated to green financial instruments, and where, in fact, it started all with the green bonds that the European Investment Bank was referring on early on. And again, today, 3 years later, or almost 3 years later, we can say, in fact, it has been an overwhelming success. because we have on our platform not only green bonds, but also social and sustainable bonds, ESG funds, in the meantime labeled funds. We have indices, and basically we're aiming of having the full spectrum of financial instruments under sustainable form on our platform. And today we have a market share of roughly 50% plus of all sustainability bonds, green social sustainability bonds issued worldwide and listed on an exchange. So what did we do, in fact, different to other exchanges? Well, above all, we created transparency. When we are looking at a green bond, for example, it's a bond like any other, but it has these green elements, in other words, a concrete project which you need to describe, which you need to report on, and that's information which is not mandatory. This is recommended by market participants. And of course, investors who invest in sustainability overall want to know, as we tend to say, where their money is going. And that's the big difference to conventional finance. You have clearly identified projects, clearly identified allocations of capital. Now, in order to comfort investors, you need to have disclosure. Disclosure provides transparency. Transparency provides trust. And trust is the basis of a sound functioning of capital markets. And when we're looking at the challenge that we have, it's obvious that we need to mobilize massive amounts of capital in order to make the 2030 program happen. And whatever numbers you are using, in fact, I tend to stick to the ones that the UN issued in 2014, and it was about $6 trillion investments gap in order to achieve that objective. In the meantime, you see many different amounts, and they have all one point in common. They are going up, and in fact, they are enormous. Now, we tend to say sustainability is about business. It's not about doing good, not to be the example, but in fact, it's about business. Only business will mobilize, in fact, these huge amounts of capital. And we see this very clearly, in fact, today when you're looking at AGMs of the major oil companies or basically any industry around the globe. In fact, there is huge pressure coming from investors, from stakeholders who ask, in fact, for very clear representation and to make sure, in fact, that sustainability is part of the business. Because I tend to say something else. It's not only about business. Sustainability is about survival. And, you know, companies that ignore sustainability will have a problem in the future going forward. Now, when we're looking at the bond market, we have international standards in the market. So, in fact, all of these projects are clearly described. Issuers have framework. They are even, most of them are reporting ex post on what they have done. But, and all of that information, by the way, is made available for all these instruments on our website for free to everybody. But they have one big weakness. Massive amounts of data, but not comparable. And therefore, instead of reading prospectuses of 285 pages, which is the average size of a prospectus, now we are adding 100 pages of sustainability reports of all kinds. And what do you do with that? That's why it's extremely important that we are getting all of this standardized. Now, it's clear that future generations, and especially, in fact, young people, and I'm happy to see so many also young people on our platform, they will behave differently, in fact. And they do not only want to know what the project is, they want to know, in fact, how the company that issues this green bond behaves. In fact, in other words, ESG profiles will become standard. And if we do not make them standard, in fact, the market or the consumers or the investors will push for that. And that's a tremendous, strong, in fact, movement in the market. Now, I close by saying we have participated in the HNAC works of the EU Action Plan. We are participating currently in the tech groups. And I think, in fact, this conference could not have come more timely than now, because, in fact, we are just expecting tomorrow 2 important reports coming out on the green bond standards and also on taxonomy, which will create not all clarity, but, in fact, the first steps of further clarity for us to move ahead and to be able to compare data moving forward. And from that point of view, I think it's extremely timely. I would recall that there's an urgency in the market, and we need to mobilize massive amounts of capital. And I close by a word that has been said, a sentence that has been said by the Vice President of the European Parliament, who said, without money you can dream, but with money you can act. And therefore, let's act. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's perfect. I think Mr. Scharfe has been a little shy, but the one thing he has not said, and one of the many reasons why he's perfect to be starting this session and setting the context, is that the Luxembourg Stock Exchange is the Green Bond Award winner. So they're leading by example. That's why we're not saying not do as we say, not as we do. We have an example here of do as we do. So thank you very much, an inspiration as to what can be done. Next, we are delighted to welcome Heidi Hautala. Please forgive me, everybody, if I mispronounce your name. Vice President of the European Parliament, group of the Greens, European Free Alliance, Finland. Okay, we are waiting the results, the current results, so let's see what happens. I still hope you're there. And a former Minister for the International Development and State Ownership, steering of Finland throughout her career. Heidi has focused on human rights, sustainability, transparency. See, it's a no-brainer, that's why she's here, and responsible business. She recently established a cross-party working group on responsible business conduct at the European Parliament. Welcome, Heidi.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much for this initiative that the Court of Auditors and its member Eva Lindström has taken, because I believe that this is exactly the right time when we need to have the right mechanisms in place in order to implement what we have been committed to. And in my own institution, I have discovered that there is still, after almost 5 years since the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals by the UN, there's quite a lot of ignorance about what this is about. Some people think that, okay, that's the old story of environment, take care of it. We take care of the rest. Or it is like, it's nothing for my committee, which is related to the previous, the first comment. Or it is like, well, let's start to measure water consumption in our own institution. So we have to do some education among policymakers, and I am speaking as a policymaker who took an initiative in the European Parliament to look a little bit at how we could really start to implement what we are committed to. And the European Parliament has now adopted its first annual report on the implementation of the SDGs in March. And we have taken a very strong preference for the first scenario that the European Commission in its reflection paper has proposed. So the Parliament says that the first scenario is the one we opt for because it proposes an overarching strategy for the implementation of the SDGs by the EU and the Member States. The Parliament considers that in the context of the future of Europe, a sustainable Europe is the way forward to ensure the well-being and prosperity of its citizens and the planet. And I take note of the fact that, in fact, the Agenda 2030 is a deeply European agenda because we are one of the, I think, the few regions which are already committed to taking into account environmental and social implications of our decisions. So I hope that the new Parliament will put a great emphasis on looking for the right ways in which we can be a part of the implementation and of course monitoring. So what I discovered is that the committee, or Social and Economic Committee of the EU, has actually commissioned a very insightful report in December 2018, where it talks about the gaps of reaching the right information that is needed for reporting and implementation. The report, which is called Exposing EU Policy Gaps to Address the SDGs, says that there are two important gaps in the way our data base is lacking, and I'm of course referring to the well-functioning reporting by the Eurostat. But due to the lack of competencies, and please correct me if I'm mistaken, the Eurostat is not able to report on the spillover effects, which is, for instance, what kind of impact we Europeans leave to other countries. And I'm talking a lot about SDG 12, our consumption and production. We, of course, by consuming chocolate and coffee, we're very aware that there might be child labor, there might be deforestation in the supply chain. So the spillover effects need to be addressed. And another gap that this report mentions is the conviction and notion in the Agenda 2030, leave no one behind, that this is something that should deserve much more interest and attention. Now, of course, we need the right methodology in place, and I'm not the one talking about what that methodology should be. But I really hope that the Court of Auditors will be a partner in looking for that right methodology. I'm only aware that, for instance, Bertelsmann Foundation has worked on this. Now, what are then the instruments and key areas where there could be a big catch in sustainability and reporting and implementation of SDGs? I very much believe that if we want to address the gap on the spillover effects, we need to work on improving and upgrading the non-financial reporting directive towards more integrated reporting. And that should serve very well as the transparency part that many of the speakers have called for. But we also believe, I believe that we need a European level law on due diligence of companies, because without enterprises and the private sector, we are not going to be able to address the global challenges that we have. And this is what our cross-party working group is working for. We want to have in the next European Commission's working program a proposal for a EU-level human rights due diligence instrument. Mandatory, not voluntary, because the companies are telling us that there were so many voluntary ways, but none of them really worked. For instance, in the cocoa sector, there's a big buzz going on at the moment around this. And when I say human rights, I of course understand that human rights has to be understood as a pretty broad concept. So I think this would be a good step towards a full scale of sustainability if we combine such due diligence with the reporting. Then I mentioned that we also have the trade agreements, which leave a very big impacts in other countries. And I'm a bit concerned when I read, for instance, now that the EU is nearly reaching an agreement with the Mercosur countries. Many researchers are pointing out that this is not going to be sustainable because, for instance, Brazil is not at all committed to preserving of rainforests. Likewise, the question of the fossil fuels that was raised in the previous debate, I think it's very challenging because I don't think we can really go at the EU level. We cannot just forget the member states. Indeed, this week, the European Council will convene and it will agree on a European, agenda, I think. And climate will be a very big part of it. And how can we ever reach what we are committed to if the member states do not commit themselves by the side of the EU institutions themselves? So the Secretary General of the UN has just called on for the EU to sharpen its emission reductions target to 55% by 2030 compared with 1990 levels. This is, we need, if we want a global change and global boosting of climate policies, the EU must be there to be the front runner. And I think our sustainability reporting and sustainability implementation will be in a very big role here. So let's look across the whole screen. It's all very well to start with climate and environment, but we have to be able to face the challenge that we have to cross the silos in our own organization and start to working together. Transparency and exposing different interests, I think, is really key in that. So I close by saying that I think transparency should be at the heart of our exercise of SDGs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Heidi, and setting out the vision as to what stakeholders want. Finally, next I'm delighted to invite Mr. Arnaldus. However many times I've practiced this, I still get it wrong. My apologies. Abramovitsits, first Vice President of the European Commission for the Committee on the Regions and member of the Zarai District Municipal Council in Lithuania. Over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be here with this high-level conference. So I'm just representing Committee of the Regions. This is European Union consultative body from local representative from local and regional authorities. And I'm also representing local authority in Lithuania. I'm running the municipality. So for us, it's a very important topic. In this regard, Committee of the Regions take very active part in preparation for the reflecting paper with our contribution to the European Commission. And finally, I'm now appointed as a rapporteur for the Committee of the Region opinion entitled SDGs, a basis for a long-term EU strategy for sustainable Europe 2030. So one of the key issue is encourage EU institutions and member states to increase their reporting on sustainable development. And the opinion will be adopted next week in the plenary session of Committee of the Regions with the participation of Vice President Katainen. We also asked the Commission to provide an overarching strategy containing very clear targets, timelines, and deliverables by 2030. So we have some position from today from Mr. Koopman, Director General of the Budget. It's not exactly what we are expecting for the next decade, because it's still, SDGs is not the working program for the Commission, but hope that together with other institutions, as European Parliament, we will insist on very higher level of the strategy for the next decade, Sustainable Europe 2030. So there's a few recommendations I want to point. The first of all, that next European Commission President could report on implementation of the SDGs on an annual basis to the European Parliament and to the Council. I think it will be taken decision by the next Commission, but we are very soon from the forming of such commission. The second, there is existing many of the instruments like European semester, annual growth survey. We need to adjust those instruments to the changing needs and to the SDGs. And I suggest that aligning the European semester to the SDGs would help coordinate and enforce implementation of SDGs. And in terms of reporting, for example, annual growth survey would therefore become annual sustainable development survey. Also, I would call for creation a multi-annual EU Sustainable Development Survey, which would take stock of the implementation of the EU strategy and the member states' Sustainable Development Actions Plan. It's very, very important. Anyway, but we are representing regions and the cities, and of course, not only the European Union institution or the member states institution taking the role. I suppose that that local and regional authorities we performing about 65% of the SDG target. Clearly, involvement of the regions and cities in those targets. So not only the national governments taking a lead. And many of the, in various countries, many of the regions or the cities taking the leadership, like, for example, in Spain, Basque Country, in Finland, Espoo city, and Germany, North Rhine-Westphalia. They very clearly adapting indicators for their own specific, but those indicators closely reflect United Nations and EU ones, but they are sometimes significantly adapted to the local context and the level of information available. So it's very, very specific, I think, and very important. Many of the subnational governments actively implementing the SDGs are not involved in sustainability reporting at the national level, and so we need to change that situation. We have proposed that regions can submit their own reviews on the voluntary level. Another problem need to be tackled is disaggregated data. Sometimes on very different levels, under service by Eurobarometer or the other institutions, national average misleading to the real situation because there is a huge disparities between the regions itself. It's same for my country, for Lithuania, where the disparities with the capital region and the peripheral regions is very significant. So we need to very clear aggregated data and the regional and where necessary on the local level to enable better distinctions when the national average is misleading. So such regions and cities elaborating their own indicators and collecting data in partnership with local actors, including with the private sector, because regions and the cities are closer to the economic development, to the real economy, to the SMEs, and hope that this cooperation would help to produce more reliable data. However, developing local indicators to take into account regional disparities is very time and resource intensive for those entities. So there's a big scope of different aspects for reporting and for reliability or aggregation of the data. But anyway, we need to find cooperation together with the European Union institutions, national authorities, and the public-private sector to find the better solution how to achieve reliable data and improve reporting. So I hope that it helps us to pave the way for the real Sustainable Europe strategy for the 2030, and it will be achievable only with all our institutions work together. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping to time. I'm conscious it seems like a big stream of presentations, and then you're sitting there. I hope you're contemplating your questions. What we're going to do, I'm going to ask Mr. Lazarus Lazarou to come up, and then to share his reflections. I'll open it up for questions at that stage in terms of what stakeholders want. What do you want as stakeholders too? And then we'll ask Ville and Sarah to come on afterwards, if that's okay. Just breaks the session up a little bit, otherwise you're waiting for a long time for all those burning questions. Okay, so over to Mr. Lazarou, who is the Dean of Chamber 5, Financing and Administrating the Union. He's member responsible for the European Court of Auditors annual report. He's a fellow ACCA, well, thumbs up, and began his professional career in audit firms in the UK and Cyprus for 7 years, and then served in the Inland Revenue. He was appointed Auditor General for the Republic of Cyprus. So he brings a wealth of private and public sector expertise. So over to you, Mr. Lazarou.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In my capacity as Dean of Chamber 5, Eva's Chamber, I congratulate her and her team for a job well done in both the timely delivery of the quick special report on sustainability and in organizing this conference. And of course, I echo the feelings of my colleagues at the court. Both the quick special report and this conference are very, very timely and at the forefront of developments. Sustainability reporting is a relatively new branch on the tree of reporting. Back in September 2016, I was a reporting member for the Court's special report on the Commission's governance. In this report, we have called upon the Commission to present a single accountability report that contains the accounts, but also incorporates, amongst other, operational and strategic risks, a report on non-financial performance and information on activities during the year and the achievement of policy objectives. The Commission reacted by presenting a suite of reports called the Integrated Financial Reporting Package. As you can see from this title, this package is still very much orientated on the finance side. Reporting can have multiple goals, ranging from publicity as an extension of marketing, through providing information, to being accountable. And accountability itself can range in perspective from direct stakeholders to the wider general public. The expectations to reporting may differ from the perspective. Shareholders may look at the financial performance and look at sustainability as an element of long-term financial survival. Trade unions may view the reporting from the perspective of the social contract as well as an opportunity to wage increases. A customer may look at the efficient and fair use of resources of the organization for a decision to engage with the organization. For our work on governance in the special report that I mentioned, we used IFAC's and SIPFA's good governance in the public sector's framework. The framework includes, amongst other, attention to defining outcomes in terms of sustainable, economic, social, and environmental benefits, and good practices in transparency, reporting, and audit to deliver effective accountability. Finance and sustainability are interlinked, especially in the public sector. Where a public body, a government of the EU, sets goals or commits to contribute to global goals, fair and timely reporting is necessary. Performance reporting is already recognized as a necessary complement to financial reporting. Sustainability reporting is a similar complement that needs equal attention. Ideally, sustainability should be an integrated part of policy development, execution, and reporting. However, this is not always the case. Too often, sustainability is treated as a side product and report on it separately. There is some movement towards integrated reporting, and sustainability would need to be considered. A clear and direct link between the two is through the discussion of strategy and risk. For some companies, for example, in the agri-environmental business, some risks are potential threats to long-term business continuity on the one hand and opportunities on the other hand. One can find good practices in some private sector reporting. While sustainability reporting may be one of the youngest branches on the tree of reporting, it is still developing. As a branch, it will need to have sufficient water and sunshine to flourish. It cannot stand on its own. Concluding, if we want to achieve results, the move towards an integrated approach to reporting should gather speed and include sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lazarou. That's perfect, and I think that sets us up very well this afternoon. As I understand, Mr. Richard Howitt is here as well today to talk about integrated reporting. So great. Hopefully, if Ville and Sarah will indulge me, I'm sure you have questions, or do you want, rather than keep on waiting until right at the very end? So, any burning questions from the audience? The gentleman there.
Thank you very much. My name is Eduardo Ruiz. I'm the Secretary General of the European Court of Auditors, and I am one of the persons that was interviewed by the team of Eva Lindström in the preparation of this report. And then, so I have a long experience in audit, but for a while, I am also managing the European Court of Auditors, the resources and the administrative services. So my point of view is combined from the audit point of view, but also from the manager point of view. And I would like to ask to the profession, to the organization that are linked to the profession, but also to the regulators, or also to the people that is on the stand, to whether they are not a little bit afraid of this, I would call reporting pathology, in the sense that, as Mr. Lázaro pointed out, it's necessary to report on financial, on performance, on results, and also on the sustainability, and whether it's not necessary to start on working on these standards and framework to have a better basis to be able to deliver.
Thank you. Ooh, right. Who do I ask first? May I ask actually, Robert, to start in terms of how you've overcome this? Surely you face the same challenges in terms of managing the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. So, if you think it's difficult,
well, you know. And it has been said early on already, the reporting means more workload. And if I translate this into more costs.
Indeed.
And the question is, what's the counterparty for that? And this is also one of the debates that an answer that the European Commission must come up with. What's the incentives at the end of the day? Now, you can look at it from different angles, and to cut it short, I believe that it's not the question only, what do I get as a company, as a counterpart, because I firmly believe that it will be an element of survival going forward. Your consumers, your investors, citizens, the young generations, they will ask different questions. And therefore, you need to integrate this reporting into your business. I think, in fact, at the same time, there's leeway for simplifying a number of other things. And therefore, for example, companies, and I take the capital markets, the area I know best, I said it earlier on, 285 pages is the average prospectus. I think, in fact, companies that go the extra mile and reporting on ESG and on detailed allocation of funds and so on, could see, in fact, some compensation on seeing a little bit less reporting on the non-SDG type of elements.
Good. Well, that's a really good suggestion. Heidi, would you like to add?
Well, just I think we heard from Robert Scharfe in his opening remarks that the new generation takes it for granted that they want to know where the money goes to and how how they spend their money, what's the social, environmental, etc. impact. And I also believe that now that the EU Commission has moved very, I would say, boldly on move forward with the sustainable finance, it's absolutely vital that to know if you want to invest in a company and your customers want to know, then it has to be, the company has to be transparent, and that will be best achieved by reporting.
So demand and supply. How about for us in the public sector working with government, so starting with yourself, Mr. Abramovich?
So the same, I can just reiterate that for public sector is the most important is reliability of data and transparency of that. And I don't think it's a big additional burden, let's say, to the public sector. But anyway, sometimes we catching very, very different, but haven't found the result. So, as I said, that there's existing different tools and instruments like annual growth survey, European semester, and we need to just to adjust those data. That's the key issue for the public sector and for our organization like regions and cities.
And finally, Mr. Lazary, is there anything else you'd like to add to that point? It's very scary.
Yes. Yes, I will borrow from the conversation I had earlier with Valerie Arnold because I asked her, don't you think that setting up a standard for sustainability reporting would be better and much helpful? And I agree with her. She told me that a standard will not be, and it cannot be too strict and prescriptive. It will be just a guidance standard by nature. But at the end of the day, it's down to corporations, and talking about public service, down to governments to exercise, well, in the private sector, responsible capitalism, as Valerie has called it, and in the public sector, responsible governance. And okay, there will be a cost for the governments and for private businesses, but the cost would be that if they don't deliver, they will pay the price. In the private sector, customers, the younger generation will begin to turn away from non-responsible corporations, and even more so in the public sector, because the younger generation will penalize governments for not voting for them to return to office. So that is the cost, and that is what they have to deliver.
Yes. So we need to, yes, absolutely. I find it difficult to disagree with you, with what's been said here. That's why I'm doing it. No. It is. Just because it's difficult, the number of things that we've done and achieved because they were difficult, we can avoid lots of things because they're easy, but we have another question. Yeah. Eva.
Just a small comment. I think it's important to stress that in the public sector we have a very long tradition on performance reporting, and we're doing this for quite some years. So it's not sort of starting out of the blue, and I think someone here talked about renewing the business model or securing the business model, and I think that might also go both for public institution, but also maybe for the EU institution, and maybe also for the governments in the member states. So I think to build on the long tradition on performance reporting is also important, and I also would like to stress that it's not like we should have performance reporting and then we have sustainability reporting, because sustainability reporting is really about good performance reporting. I mean, looking at these 17 goals on the stage, that is what we would like to perform. So that is also what we should perform about.
Yes. Perfect. Thank you. Right, I'm going to hold to, before we ask, keep your questions, keep thinking about them. So that's what we've heard, our views on sustainability reporting. What do our stakeholders want? But as we're keen to make sure, and we keep getting told, Greta Thunberg and others, our children, my children and grandchildren are saying, what are you doing for us? So I'll hand over now to the younger generation to share their views. I'll start with Ville Myanmar to set out his scene so we can hear from what we, rather than hearing what we think they want, let's hear what they want directly. So welcome to the stage, over to you, and then we'll ask questions at the end. Is that okay?
Thank you very much. This works. Very good. First of all, as you can see, I'm not Greta, but I imagine she was busy, so they contacted me instead. And now that I have your attention, let's get to it. Some 1,300 days ago, the European Union committed itself to adopting and implementing the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda. That was 3.5 years ago. And now from the reporting, the reviews that we have heard of today from the European Court of Auditors, we hear that there's a lot of work to be done. This is very worrying for young people and young generations. Indeed, I'm a young person. My name is Ville, I come from Finland, but all of that today is really irrelevant. I'm here for the European Youth Forum, which is an umbrella organization of youth organizations in Europe, representing over 105 youth organizations and bringing together over 40 million young people in Europe. I'm very happy to share 3 messages from us, so thank you European Court of Auditors and Eva specifically for inviting us. Message number 1, in case you only remember one message. There is a need for comprehensive European strategy. Today we heard that the European Union is either not implementing or not reporting or both on its implementation of the 2030 Agenda. What we did hear is that there was a reflection paper in the spring where a comprehensive European strategy was one of the 3 alternatives, one of the 3 alternative ways forward. We share the recognition that more needs to be done. We miss the sense of urgency that we feel as the young generation. For example, the reflection paper admits that we are further away from reaching SDG number 10 on inequalities today than we were when they were adopted in 2015. Every 3rd young person in Europe under the age of 24 is at risk of social exclusion or poverty. This means this is not only a development agenda, it's not only an agenda in the global south, it is also a European agenda. And we are concerned that we are not seeing that overarching strategy. We agree, on the other hand, with the Council conclusions from June 2017 and with our elected representatives from the European Parliament that more should be done. The good stuff is that young people care. We recently conducted a study on youth organizations' contributions on the SDGs, and we were ourselves surprised, having surveyed 89 youth organizations from 37 different countries in Europe, of the high awareness of the Agenda 2030 amongst young people involved in youth organizations. The findings were encouraging. However, at the same time, we heard that there are often barriers for these organizations to engage with the agenda implementation. Resources are an obvious point and don't need repeating, but often youth organizations are not considered as stakeholders when Agenda 2030 implementation is discussed. So there's also this mental idea that young people are somehow not needed in the conversation. Another example is our view on the next MFF, Multi-Annual Financial Framework. One of the 3 priorities, in addition to adopting a rights-based approach and youth mainstreaming the budget, is to sustainability-proof the EU's next MFF. In other words, young people care. Thirdly, we believe that for the EU's reporting to be accurate, it should be inclusive and include civil society representation, including young people, in the way it's carried out. It also has to be holistic, as I said, and include more than EU's development cooperation and external action agenda in the reporting. And finally, it should be accessible, and there's a lot to say there. It should be available, understandable, It should be done in a standardized and user-friendly format. Young people are people too and don't like reading long Excel sheets. It should be based on indicators that themselves are not contradicting the agenda, such as the GDP. Some 1,300 days later, we are not really where we wanted to see us when the agenda was adopted. It is still possible to get where we need to go, but not if we continue with the business as usual. I agree with some of the earlier speakers that to act you need money. I would like to add you also need power. And this is why young people are marching on the streets. But I'm glad today I was invited here and I did not have to shout from the street near the building. So thank you again for the invitation. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. You can always tell the young ones cool in their jeans and stuff. I don't think I'd look that cool even if I did wear my jeans. All right, and finally, Sarah, who's also an expert in youth consumption and lifestyle trends, to share her observations. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I found my first gray hair last week, so I'm really happy to be presented as a young girl today. More will come, yes, I figured that out, yeah. But I'm not here only because I am young, hopefully. I work at the Swedish insights company Ungdomsbarometern, in English Youth Barometer, and since 1991 we've been studying behaviors and preferences and attitudes among young people, mostly in Sweden but also in the Nordic region. And we've been talking a lot today about sustainability reporting, and I would like to address the importance of sustainability reporting, of course, but I'd also like to move the perspective a bit onto action. We've mentioned it a couple of times, but I want to talk to you about how information can promote young people and soon-to-be adults to act more sustainable. And when I say young people, I'm first and foremost talking about 15 to 24-year-old. And as I said, we do studies in the whole of the Nordic region, but I'm going to focus on Sweden today and Swedish youth. Why? Well, I'm Swedish as well, and I'm proud to say that the importance of sustainability, it's most important for Swedish people. Finland, second place. Norway and Denmark's youth is a bit behind, but I think they'll come around soon. So I'm going to start by showing you this number. One third of Sweden's 15 to 24-year-old feels lack of information on sustainability prevents them from acting more sustainable. So too little or bad information on the environmental issue prevents them from acting sustainable. And giving you a bit of a background to Sweden's youth population, I want to start by showing you this number as well. We've seen the last couple of years a growing interest among the youth for political issues, but it's not so much a party politician interest, more than actual issues, separate issues like the environment, anti-racism, feminism, and the reference to Greta Thunberg was made earlier, and she is a leading person in that, and she's only 15 years old. I think that's quite amazing. And young people in Sweden today are more and more trying to act on this engagement, because almost 70% once a month feel stressed out over the climate. And I'm going to hurry up a bit on my slides, but I want to show you some of the social issues or events and happenings over the past years that's actually affected young people a lot, and gives you a bit of a background to why they are acting or trying to act more sustainable. Donald Trump and the American politics, terrorist attack in Stockholm, of course, it comes close. Climate change and Me Too. And you can all see this in how young people are acting. Every other young Swedish people is actually thinking the environmental issue is the most important social issue. Talking about responsibility and capability, first showing the responsibility, young people actually think politicians has the most responsibility to act on the environmental issue and sustainability issue. But if we look at the capability, we also see that the private sector, companies and brands have a lot of possibility to actually make a change when we're talking about sustainability. But of course, politicians have a big responsibility as well as capability. And young people also think they have a responsibility themselves. And one thing is to consume more sustainability. And what is a conscious and engaged consumer? Well, they make more thoughtful purchases, think one extra time if they really need to buy that product. They look at content and nutrition because it's important to buy healthy products both for the body but also for the environment, of course. And they also look at packaging, land of produce, and certifications. They want to know what they buy. And they actually stop consuming from businesses that's not as sustainable as they would like, that doesn't share their values, and they also try to influence their family and friends to do the same. So, I'm going to close up with a more concrete slide. So where do you communicate? Where do you communicate your sustainability work? Well, if you are a company that makes products, use the packaging. But also use your website. But as my previous speaker said, we don't like too much information. Keep it simple, keep it light. What's your time limit? What's your frame? But also in the business concept, of course, don't hesitate to communicate every sustainability action that you do, and stand up for yourself and your own sustainability actions. Spread the word and make other people act the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. A really interesting presentations as well, the last two, in terms of challenging us. What does the future generation want from us? Okay, the floor is open for questions. I know it's coming to lunchtime, but hopefully there's a little bit of energy in terms of what you want to ask. Ask now. Any questions? We have a question.
Hello, my name is Katarzyna Radecka-Moros. I also work at the European Court of Auditors. And I have just a few questions because, firstly, maybe to Mr. Scharfe, I was wondering how could we encourage the private companies to report on sustainability, to report on sustainability, but in terms of how do their financial decisions impact on sustainability. I think it was already raised before that many companies, including Luxembourgish companies, Luxembourgish banks, do report in their sustainability reports mostly about the effects of running their organization without informing the stakeholders how do they financial decisions, what is the impact on sustainability.
Thank you.
Yet another question about the public sector. I was wondering whether we could be more actively contributing perhaps to the demand raised, because I think many national and even regional authorities, they are struggling to find the right taxonomy. Maybe this is something that we as the court could think of, and maybe we could contribute better. And just last question to our young representatives, because maybe I'm wrong, but I think the youth turnout in the recent European elections was not very impressive. So do you think about it? I'm sure you do, but what are your ideas about increasing the turnout of youth, young generation into in the elections to get the power that you ask for? Thank you.
Thank you very much. By the way, those of you thinking, it's 12:30, why aren't we going for lunch? We've been told there's a slight delay on lunch outside, so I've been given an extra 5 minutes. So really, I'm not keeping you from lunch. Over to you, Robert, for the first question.
You could put a lot of elements in this. I try to be very brief on this. We learned about the non-standardization of ESG reporting today, in fact, and again tomorrow, in fact, we will get a little bit more guidance on where this is going. If I take the example of the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, in fact, we have imposed, in fact, a mandatory ESG reporting on companies listed on the exchange. Now, that's easier said and imposed than done. So, in fact, what we are following up with, and this is a question of, I think, a couple of weeks, where we will issue, in fact, an ESG guide to tell companies basically how to do it. Because that's where the basic problem today is. Do I keep it short? Do I keep it extensive? How to do it? And in fact, here we try to help them in order to make this effort as painless and little costly, in fact, as possible. Because also there, it's an evolution. You need to start somewhere and then improve over time, and don't aim for the first ESG reporting to be the perfect example in the market. The second point about how does it influence, in fact, the financial decisions, well, that's an extremely, in fact, interesting one, and it's difficult to give a generic answer, in fact, but what we see, in fact, more and more, companies who have already today good ESG reports understand that it's not only about reporting about their renewable energy consumption and water consumption and whatever have you, but in fact more about how do I need to behave, how do I need to set up my manufacturing entity, how do I need to choose my suppliers, and where do I choose them, or where do all of this, in fact, are elements which are influencing the way production is being done. Because, in fact, and I just take in 2 words, BMW, just as an example, has imposed on their steel manufacturer a number of ESG standards which they need to fulfill in order to be able to remain a supplier, because they feel that they, as a car producer, want to say at one point in time to the consumer, this is how this car has been produced, and assuming that this is the type of answers that investors or purchasers, in fact, want to have at the end.
Perfect. Yeah, that's excellent. Is there anything else that we'd like to add to that first question? No. Right. So, what should we do within the European Parliament and in terms of reporting? I'm going to pick on Mr. Lazarou. I apologise in terms of. I think we have a volunteer for the group who can take this initiative forward. But to answer the question, what could we be doing within sustainability reporting and defining and agreeing with our stakeholders what we should do? How can we reach out? Are you proposing to be part of that and setting some standards? What should we do?
We. Who is we?
We. Collectively, okay. We as a group here.
I have one suggestion.
Sure.
I think Ville Majama pointed very well out that this whole adventure must be about participation. And I think we have one very interesting experience already with the multi-stakeholder platform, which actually put forward a very good paper last autumn, preceding the European Commission's reflection paper. So I hope that institution will somehow continue to convene and very much include the youth generation and their organizations.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is there anything more at the Centre of the Regions from your observations, do you think?
And just very brief, the reporting itself is not the sake for the reporting. We need to find out the situation, and the situation, how to change the situation, to improve, to set the targets. And for those, we need resources, for the public sector, I said, human resources and financial resources. There is such as European budget, so-called MFF. Mr. Roman said that some policies like climate changes will be funding from the MFF, but there are much more variety of SDGs. So we need for public sector some resources like MFF, national resources, regional resources, and the let's say reliable and transparent data need to identify situation and tackle and develop situation. That's it.
Perfect, thank you. And going back to the final question, the youth question. So how do we get them to engage, and how our youth, obviously they are engaged, but how do we get them to vote? Because the public policies, as we know, are always geared towards the people who vote.
I can just
Do you want to take that, Sarah? Or
and then you can talk more about elections.
Okay.
But I just want to talk about young people as really engaged, and they are acting on their sustainability thinking, even if they are not that engaged in party politics. And I think that's a very interesting perspective to remember as well, that we're talking more and more in Sweden about a lifestyle engagement, or trying to act through consumption, what you eat, what you buy, who you're talking to, which influencers you're following on social media. And I think that's an aspect not to be forgotten, and to combine with party politics. Of course, it's important to vote, I know. Take it away.
Thank you for the question. Very happy to speak about young people's political participation. And also I forgot to mention the EU's multi-stakeholder platform. It was on my minutes, on my speech notes, but then I had to cut on the go, and I forgot to mention that. It was a good practice. If there's anyone in the room who is responsible for that, thank you. Please carry on that kind of inclusive methodology also in the future. As when it comes to European elections, very frankly, we don't know yet what the youth turnout was. It takes, 5 years ago, it took almost until mid-November, October to hear what the final numbers were. We are positive, however, because we saw how the overall turnout increased, and we hope that this also reflects in the youth turnout. What we can say is we can count the average age of the elected MEPs. And if I had more time, I would love to do a poll and see what do you think, whether it went up or down. But I'm not sure I have, so I have to tell you it right away. It was increased 75%. If we ask what is the number of MEPs under 30 elected in the parliament, it was increased 75%. However, in numbers, it went up from 1.3% to 2.something%. So in terms of the whole EP, we're not doing very well, but we're doing 75% better than we did 5 years ago. So there's maybe something learned there. When it comes to what we can do, I mean, the main responsibility really is with the political parties. These are the people who make the lists. If young people don't see young people on the lists of candidates, okay, do you really feel represented that way? If you only see white old men, for example. If you don't see your agenda on the discussions on the party program or in the TV debates, if you don't hear anything about climate, if you don't hear anything about digitalization, about future of work, about disinformation, are you going to be interested? I really agree with Sarah, was it?
Yes.
With Sarah, that young people, if you ask young people, they say they are politically active and engaged. If you ask, is that in a political party, they ask you, what? What's that? How does that represent me? And that's really a challenge for political parties as well.
It's about trust, I might add. Also, low trust in politicians. Sorry, but true.
Brilliant. No, I think that's it brings it right the way back to the title of this conference, which is Trust, Transparency, the Role of the Auditor, and Sustainability Reporting. Brilliant. I don't think I could have planted that better. I'm conscious there are so many questions, so much more we could ask. I hope my panel on here will be outside joining. Lunch is now available, so you'll be able to catch up and get some ask further questions outside. I love, just to summarize very quickly before you run, yes, we've heard it not just once or twice, it's a recurring theme. Sometimes I think perfection can lead to inertia. Let's get it right, let's get it right, let's get it right. Let's just do something. So our future generations are engaged, will vote, and then will tell us, and we'll get that virtuous cycle. Let's get that engagement, but let's start. So I'll be very keen to follow what's happening with the Luxembourg Stock Exchange and what you do with your guidance notes. So thank you very much. Thank you to my audience and to my speakers. A huge thanks. Okay, we're starting at 1:30 and lunch is outside now.